My boss mocked my ideas in front of everyone. Now he works for me.
You'll never make it out there, he laughed during our meeting. I quietly handed him my resignation. 2 years later, he asked if I was hiring. The boardroom fell silent as Michael's laughter echoed off the glass walls. 12 executives froze, their eyes darting between Michael and me. I stood at the head of the table, my presentation slide still projecting on the screen behind me, the words "Digital Innovation Strategy" emblazoned in bold letters. At 50, I'd spent nearly 2 decades at Treadway Communications. My salt and pepper hair and weathered hands spoke of my years of dedication. I had risen through the ranks slowly but steadily, earning my position as Senior Marketing Director through persistence rather than politics. "Richard," Michael continued, wiping tears of amusement from his eyes, "these ideas might work at some tech startup with 20-somethings and foosball tables, but this is a serious company. We have shareholders to answer to." I looked down at my notes, carefully prepared over months of research. My proposal for transitioning our traditional marketing agency toward digital innovation wasn't just ambitious, it was necessary for our survival. I'd watched our competitors adapt while we clung to outdated models, losing clients month after month. "The market is changing," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. "If we don't evolve, we'll be obsolete within 5 years. Michael stood up, straightening his custom Italian suit. At 43, he'd been my boss for only 3 years, having charmed his way into the CEO position with his MBA and connections rather than actual experience in our industry. "Richard still thinks it's 1999, he announced to the room, generating nervous chuckles from those eager to stay in his good graces. "Next, he'll suggest we invest in MySpace." More laughter followed. I packed my presentation materials slowly, my hands trembling slightly. This wasn't the first time Michael had dismissed my ideas, but it was certainly the most public and humiliating rejection. As people filed out, my colleague Sarah whispered, "He just doesn't get it, Richard. You're right about everything." But being right didn't matter when the person in charge refused to listen. That evening I sat in my home office, staring at the framed certificate of my 30-year membership in the Marketing Association hanging on the wall. Next to it was a photo from 10 years ago, me accepting an industry award for campaign excellence. My wife, Susan, brought me a cup of tea, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. "Another rough day?" she asked. Michael shot down my proposal, laughed at it, I said, the defeat evident in my voice. "Said I'd never make it out there if I left." Susan squeezed my shoulder. "He's wrong." 3 days later, after sleepless nights weighing my options, I drafted my resignation letter. I printed it on the premium paper we used for client presentations. My hands were steady now, resolved. The next morning I walked into Michael's office without an appointment. He was on the phone, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. He held up a finger, signaling me to wait. I didn't wait. I placed the envelope on his desk and turned to leave. "What's this?" he called after me, covering the phone's mouthpiece. I stopped at the doorway, my back still to him. "My resignation, effective immediately." "Wait, Richard," he said, suddenly dropping his call. "Let's talk about this." I finally turned to face him. "There's nothing to talk about. You've made it clear my ideas have no place here." A flicker of concern crossed his face. "You're being dramatic. Where are you going to go? Starting over at 50 isn't exactly—" "You said it yourself," I interrupted, a calm settling over me. "I'll never make it out there. I guess we'll find out." As I walked out of his office, past the cubicles of colleagues I'd known for years, a strange lightness filled my chest. For the first time in a long time, the future was unwritten. Terrifying, yes, but also filled with possibility. That night, as I told Susan I'd quit, her eyes widened. "What are we going to do?" she asked, voice tight with worry. I took her hands in mine. "I'm going to prove him wrong." The morning after I quit, I woke up in a cold sweat. The bedroom was still dark, the digital clock on my nightstand showing 4:17 a.m. Beside me, Susan slept peacefully, unaware of the panic gripping me. What had I done? I'd walked away from a 6-figure salary, comprehensive health benefits, and the security that had supported our family for decades. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the kitchen. Our mortgage still had 12 years left. Our daughter Claire's college tuition was due next semester. And here I was, a 50-year-old man with nothing but a half-formed business plan and wounded pride. For 20 minutes I sat at the kitchen table, calculating figures on a yellow legal pad. Our savings would last 6 months if we were careful. After that, the sound of Susan's footsteps broke my concentration. She stood in the doorway tying her robe. "I thought I'd find you down here," she said, filling the kettle. "Second thoughts?" "More like fourth or fifth," I admitted. "Maybe I should call Michael, tell him I was having a bad day." Susan sat across from me, her expression serious. "Is that what you want?" I looked down at my notes, covered in numbers and question marks. "No," I said finally, "but I'm terrified." She reached across the table and took my hand. "So am I. But I've watched you drag yourself to that office for years now, coming home more defeated each day. You've been dying slowly in that place." Her words hung in the air between us, their truth undeniable. Later that morning, I converted our guest bedroom into an office. I bought a domain name, printed business cards, and drafted a business plan for Reed Digital Strategies, the name a nod to my middle name. It looked good on paper, but doubt continued to gnaw at me. Would anyone take a chance on me? Michael's mocking laughter still echoed in my ears. For 2 weeks I called former clients, connections from industry events, even old college classmates who had risen to marketing positions. Many didn't return my calls. Some responded with vague promises to keep me in mind. One old colleague, now a VP at a sporting goods company, met me for coffee, only to offer sympathy rather than business. "So it's tough out there, Rich," he said, checking his watch repeatedly. "Companies want the young digital natives now." Each rejection deepened my doubt. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe I was too old, too set in my ways. The industry had changed, and perhaps I hadn't changed with it. One evening, after a particularly discouraging day of unanswered emails, I found Susan in our bedroom, looking through an old photo album. "Remember this?" she asked, pointing to a faded photograph of me standing next to a vintage VW bus, long hair blowing in the wind. I smiled despite myself. It was from 1992, when I had left my first marketing job to start a small advertising agency with 2 college friends. The venture had lasted 18 months before folding, after which I had sought the security of Treadway Communications. "You were so brave then," Susan said. "So certain you could change the industry." "I was young and naive," I countered. "You were passionate," she corrected, "like you were when you presented your digital strategy to Michael. That passion doesn't age, Richard." The next morning, I changed tactics. Instead of pursuing large contracts, I reached out to small businesses in our area that had minimal digital presence. My pitch was simple. I wasn't offering vague digital transformation, but tangible results, more customers, better engagement, increased sales. A week later, Andrea Morgan, owner of a local bakery struggling against chain competitors, became my first client. The contract was small, but it was a start. "My nephew told me I need to be on Instagram," she confided during our first meeting, "but I can barely work my email." I developed a simple social media strategy for her bakery, taught her how to take appealing photos of her products, and helped her create targeted ads for the local community. Within a month, her weekend lines doubled in length. Encouraged, I approached other small businesses with similar needs. A family-owned hardware store followed, then a boutique clothing shop. The contracts were modest, nothing like the corporate budgets I was accustomed to at Treadway, but there was a satisfaction in seeing immediate results for these passionate business owners. Still, anxiety shadowed me. My bank account was draining faster than new clients were signing on. At night, I would wake up wondering if I had made a catastrophic mistake. 3 months after leaving Treadway, I was working 12-hour days for a fraction of my former salary. Susan had taken extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse to help make ends meet. We stopped eating out, cancelled streaming services, and postponed our anniversary trip. One rainy Tuesday, I sat in my makeshift office, staring at our dwindling savings account online. The phone rang, an unknown number. "Reed Digital Strategies," I answered, trying to sound confident. "Richard, This is James Wilson from Meridian Manufacturing. Your name came up in a conversation with Andrea Morgan. She says you're doing wonders for her bakery. We need to talk about our digital presence. Are you available for a meeting this week? My heart raced. Meridian Manufacturing wasn't a small business. It was a regional company with over 200 employees. This could be the break I needed. I can make myself available, I said, grabbing my calendar. How does Thursday sound? As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Perhaps I wasn't too old, too obsolete. Perhaps Michael was wrong after all. But a small voice inside me whispered caution. One potential client didn't guarantee success. The road ahead remained long and uncertain. 6 months after leaving Treadway, I found myself in an unfamiliar position, turning down work. The meeting with Meridian Manufacturing had exceeded all expectations. James Wilson hadn't just wanted social media management. He needed a complete digital overhaul of their customer experience. Our website looks like it was built in 2005, he had admitted during our first meeting. And frankly, it probably was. The Meridian contract wasn't just financially significant, it was validation. Their trust in my vision gave me the confidence to approach larger clients and the portfolio to prove I could deliver results. Susan and I celebrated with a modest dinner at home, a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. To read digital strategies, she toasted, her eyes twinkling in the candlelight. And to my husband, who had the courage to start over. I smiled, but anxiety still lurked beneath the surface. One good client didn't guarantee lasting success. I needed to build something sustainable. The following week, I received an unexpected call from Sarah, my former colleague at Treadway. "Richard," she said, her voice hushed as if she were hiding in a stairwell. "I heard about the Meridian account. That's fantastic." "Thanks," I replied cautiously. "How are things at Treadway?" Her sigh carried a weight I recognized all too well. "Declining. We lost the Peterson account last week." My eyebrows shot up. Peterson Electronics had been Treadway's biggest client for nearly a decade. What happened? They wanted a digital-first approach. Michael insisted we stick with traditional media buys. She paused. "He actually referenced your presentation in the meeting, said it was an example of chasing trends instead of focusing on proven methods." I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. I had no desire to see Treadway fail. Too many good people worked there. But Michael's stubborn refusal to adapt was exactly what I had warned about. "Sarah," I said slowly, "are you calling for a reason beyond catching up?" The silence on the line confirmed my suspicion before she spoke. "I'm sending you my resume. I can't stay here much longer." Sarah joined Reed Digital Strategies the following month, bringing not only her considerable talent, but also her network of contacts. With her help, I secured meetings with companies that wouldn't have returned my calls 6 months earlier. By my 1-year anniversary of leaving Treadway, Reed Digital Strategies had grown from a desperate gamble to a thriving boutique agency with 7 full-time employees. We moved out of my home office into a small commercial space downtown. It wasn't glamorous, exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and second-hand furniture, but it was ours. The team gathered for a modest celebration, champagne in plastic cups and a cake from Andrea's bakery, our first client who had now become a friend. "Speech!" called Beth, our youngest team member, a recent graduate who managed our social media accounts. I hadn't prepared anything, but as I looked around at the faces of people who had chosen to join my vision, words came easily. "A year ago, I stood in a boardroom while someone told me my ideas were worthless and that I'd never succeed on my own," I began, my voice steady. "I wish I could say I left that day because I was brave, but the truth is, I left because staying had become impossible." Nods of understanding rippled through the room. Most of them had similar stories. What I've learned since then is that sometimes the worst moments in our careers can lead to the best decisions of our lives. We're building something special here, not just services for our clients, but a place where innovation is valued and everyone's voice matters. I raised my plastic cup. "To all of you who took a chance on an old guy with a new idea." Laughter and applause filled our modest office, but amid the celebration, my phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Turn on Channel 8 News now." I slipped away to the break room and flipped on the small TV we'd installed. The business segment was featuring a breaking story. Treadway Communications was laying off 30% of its workforce amid restructuring challenges. The camera cut to Michael leaving the building, his face grim as reporters shouted questions. The headline below read, "Major layoffs at Treadway as clients flee to digital competitors." My stomach tightened. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in seeing the company struggle. Those were people's livelihoods at stake, many of them former colleagues who had families and mortgages. Sarah appeared beside me, her expression solemn as she watched the broadcast. "It's worse than their reporting," she said quietly. "Michael's been hiding the losses from the board for months. How bad? They might not survive the year." I switched off the TV, my celebration mood dampened. Success felt hollow if it came at the expense of others who had simply been following a misguided leader. That evening, as I drove home, I couldn't shake the image of Michael's defeated expression on the news. The man who had laughed at my ideas, who had dismissed my warnings, was now facing the very future I had predicted. But instead of satisfaction, I felt only resolve. Reed Digital Strategies would not just succeed, it would become the kind of company where what happened at Treadway could never happen, where leadership listened, where innovation thrived, and where respect was the foundation of every interaction. When I arrived home, Susan was waiting with a small gift box. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Open it," she urged. Inside was a brass nameplate, "Richard Reed, founder and CEO. I'm proud of you," she said simply. I held the nameplate, its weight solid and reassuring in my palm. "We're not quite there yet," I cautioned. Susan smiled. "You will be. And when that day comes, you'll need this." I set the nameplate on our mantel, a reminder of how far I'd come and how far I still wanted to go. 2 years after walking out of Treadway Communications, I stood backstage at the National Marketing Association's annual conference, straightening my tie for the 5th time. My palms were clammy as I reviewed my notes once more. "5 minutes, Mr. Reed," a young event coordinator informed me with a clipboard in hand. Just 2 years ago, I had been a middle-aged man starting over, dismissed as obsolete by the industry I'd devoted my life to. Now I was about to address 1,200 marketing professionals as a keynote speaker. The topic, Digital Innovation in Traditional Markets, Building Bridges, Not Walls. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the audience sat many of the same executives who had ignored my calls when I first launched Reed Digital Strategies. Today, several of them were clients. Others were competitors who monitored our rapid growth with increasing concern. Susan squeezed my arm. "You'll be amazing," she whispered, handing me a bottle of water. She had flown in specially for this event, taking rare time off from her nursing shifts. "Just tell your story." The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. "Please welcome our next speaker, a man whose boutique agency has become the industry's most talked-about success story of the year, Richard Reed." Applause filled the massive ballroom as I walked onto the stage, my heart hammering against my ribs. The bright lights momentarily blinded me, but as my eyes adjusted, I could make out faces in the audience, some familiar, some new, all attentive. I took a deep breath and began. 2 years ago, I was told I'd never make it on my own. The room quieted. I was 50 years old with outdated ideas, at least according to my former boss. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Today, Reed Digital Strategies has offices in 3 cities. We employ 32 people, and last quarter, we were named one of the fastest-growing agencies in the Midwest. I paused, letting the information settle. Not bad for a man who supposedly couldn't make it out there. The audience erupted in applause, and suddenly the nerves disappeared. I wasn't just telling my story. I was speaking for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. For the next 40 minutes, I shared insights from our journey. How we combined traditional marketing wisdom with cutting-edge digital strategies, how we prioritized clients' needs over industry trends, and how we built a company culture based on respect and innovation. As I concluded my speech, the standing ovation caught me off guard. Across the room, people I had admired throughout my career were on their feet, applauding not just my success, but the vindication of my vision. At the reception afterward, I was surrounded by well-wishers, potential clients, and even a few job seekers hoping to join our team. The validation was overwhelming after years of doubt and struggle. "Mr. Reed," a voice called from behind me. I turned to find Melissa Harmon, CEO of Vertex Industries, a company easily 10 times the size of my largest client. "Your speech was remarkable. I'd like to discuss how Reed Digital Strategies might help Vertex with our upcoming product launch." Later that evening, as Susan and I celebrated in our hotel room with room service and champagne, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made me pause. "Congratulations on your success." The sender, Michael Davidson, former CEO of Treadway Communications. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. I opened the message. "Richard, I watched your keynote online today. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't difficult to see your success, knowing I dismissed the very ideas that built it. Treadway, as you may have heard, filed for bankruptcy last month. The board finally removed me as CEO, though far too late to save the company. I've been doing some consulting work, but at 45, I find myself in a position I never anticipated, starting over. I wonder if you might have time for coffee next week. There's much I could learn from you. Regards, Michael." I stared at the screen, emotions swirling, vindication, pity, and a strange sense of closure. Susan read over my shoulder. "Are you going to respond?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it, to let him feel the same dismissal he showed me." She sat beside me on the bed. "And the other part?" I sighed, setting down my phone. "The other part remembers how it felt to be starting over at 50, terrified and alone." "You weren't alone," Susan reminded me gently. "No, I wasn't." I squeezed her hand. And that made all the difference. The next morning, as we packed to leave, I decided to respond to Michael's email. "Coffee works. Tuesday 9 a.m. at Carver's downtown. Richard." On the flight home, I gazed out the window at the clouds below, reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. Beyond the growing client list, the expanding offices, and the industry recognition, I had discovered something more valuable: my own resilience. 2 years ago, humiliated and uncertain, I had taken a leap of faith that seemed reckless to everyone except Susan. Now Reed Digital Strategies was not just surviving but thriving. We had recently secured a contract with a Fortune 500 company, beating out agencies 10 times our size. Our newest office in Chicago had opened last month, and plans for a Denver location were already underway. The business was growing faster than I had ever anticipated, requiring me to delegate responsibilities I once handled personally. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Back home, I found the brass nameplate Susan had given me now proudly displayed on my desk in our downtown headquarters. My journey from dismissed executive to successful entrepreneur had come full circle. As I settled into my chair, Beth knocked on my door. "Richard, the team wanted to show you something." She led me to our conference room where the entire staff had gathered. On the wall hung a framed copy of the magazine cover featuring our agency as Marketing Innovator of the Year. "We're proud to work here," Beth said, speaking for the group. "You've built something special." I looked around at the faces of people who had believed in my vision, some who had left secure jobs to join a startup with an uncertain future, others who had chosen us over more established companies for their first job. "We built this together," I corrected her, "and we're just getting started." Later that evening, as I drove home, I reflected on the upcoming meeting with Michael. My former boss, the man who had laughed at my ideas and dismissed my potential, now wanted my advice. The symmetry was almost too perfect. But as I pulled into my driveway, I realized something important. I didn't need Michael's validation anymore. I had already proven him wrong in every way that mattered. The real victory wasn't in making him acknowledge his mistake. It was in creating a company that embodied everything Treadway had lacked: innovation, respect, and the courage to evolve. The morning of my meeting with Michael dawned with unusual clarity for April in Chicago. I arrived at Carver's Coffee 30 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the bustling street outside. Some habits from the corporate world never fade, like controlling the setting of potentially difficult conversations. I ordered a black coffee and opened my laptop, pretending to work while my mind rehearsed various scenarios for the upcoming encounter. Would Michael be humble or defensive, desperate or merely curious? The man who had once laughed at my ideas now wanted my time. The irony wasn't lost on me. At precisely 8:58, Michael pushed through the door. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The impeccably tailored suits and confident swagger had been replaced by khakis and a button-down shirt that seemed a size too large. His hair had thinned noticeably, with streaks of grey I hadn't noticed before. He scanned the cafe until our eyes met, and I raised my hand in acknowledgement. "Richard," he said, approaching my table with an outstretched hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I stood and shook his hand, noticing the slight hesitation in his grip. "Michael, it's been a while." We sat down, an awkward silence stretching between us as he ordered a cappuccino from the passing server. I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he arranged his napkin, a small tell from a man once known for his unshakable confidence. "I watched your keynote," he finally said. "You've done remarkably well." "We have," I replied, emphasizing the plural. "My team is exceptional." Michael nodded, his gaze dropping to the table. "I should have listened to you 2 years ago. Your digital strategy presentation. You were right about everything." The admission hung in the air between us. 2 years ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now they felt strangely hollow. "Treadway could have been leading the industry transformation instead of falling victim to it," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Michael's coffee arrived, and he wrapped his hands around the mug as if seeking warmth despite the mild morning. The board finally saw the numbers I'd been managing. By then it was too late. 30 years of business, gone in 18 months. I felt a pang of sympathy despite myself. Michael had been arrogant and dismissive, but he was also facing the consequences of his actions in the harshest possible way. "What have you been doing since?" I asked. "Consulting," he said with a wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "At least that's what I call it on my LinkedIn profile. In reality, I've had 2 short-term contracts in 8 months. Nobody wants strategy advice from the man who sank Treadway." He took a sip of his cappuccino, leaving a foamy mustache that he hastily wiped away. The small gesture humanized him in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm 45, Richard. I never thought I'd be starting over at this age." The echo of my own fears from 2 years ago was unmistakable. I had been 50 when I left Treadway, terrified of the uncertain future ahead. "It's difficult," I acknowledged, "but not impossible." Michael straightened in his chair, a glimpse of his old authority returning. "That's actually why I wanted to meet. I've been following Reed Digital's growth. Your approach to integrating traditional marketing wisdom with digital innovation is exactly what I argued for at my last board meeting." He paused. "Too little, too late, of course." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "The thing is," he said, leaning forward, "I've learned my lesson. I was so focused on maintaining Treadway's established methods that I missed the industry's evolution. I was wrong, and it cost me everything." The humility in his voice seemed genuine, but I remained cautious. Michael had always been skilled at telling people what they wanted to hear. "What exactly are you looking for from me, Michael?" He took a deep breath. "I want to work for Reed Digital Strategies." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You want to work for me?" "I have 20 years of experience, connections throughout the industry, and a very clear understanding of what not to do," he said, attempting a self-deprecating smile. "Plus, now I know exactly what happens when you ignore market evolution." I studied him carefully, searching for any hint of the arrogance that had defined him at Treadway. Instead, I found only vulnerability and perhaps a touch of desperation. "Michael," I said slowly, 2 years ago, you laughed at my ideas in front of our entire executive team. You said I'd never make it out there." He winced. "I know, I was wrong." "You were more than wrong," I continued. "You were deliberately cruel. You didn't just dismiss my ideas, you humiliated me." Michael's shoulders slumped. "I was threatened by you," he admitted quietly. "You had the respect of the team in a way I never did. You understood the industry at a deeper level. It was easier to dismiss you than to admit you might be right." His candor surprised me. The Michael I had known at Treadway would never have acknowledged such weakness. "Why should I hire you?" I asked directly. My team is solid. We're growing faster than we can handle, yes, but that doesn't mean you're the right fit. Michael nodded, accepting the challenge. Because I've seen both sides now, success and failure. I know what leads to each. And because, he hesitated, because I need this chance, Richard. Just like you needed someone to believe in you when you left Treadway. I leaned back in my chair, the parallel unmistakable. I had started over at 50 because no one would take a chance on my ideas. Now Michael was asking me to take a chance on him at 45. The tables had turned completely. The man who once held my career in his hands was now placing his future in mine. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise for now. Relief washed over Michael's face. That's more than I expected, thank you. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Michael turned back. For what it's worth, Richard, I truly am sorry. I watched him walk away, his shoulders slightly stooped, looking nothing like the imperious CEO who had once seemed untouchable. Back in my office, I stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, turning our conversation over in my mind. The decision ahead wasn't just about business strategy. It was about the kind of leader and person I wanted to be. 3 days after my coffee with Michael, I still hadn't reached a decision. The executive team sat around our conference table, reviewing candidates for our expanding Chicago office. Michael's resume lay in the stack, though I hadn't yet mentioned our meeting to anyone except Sarah. This candidate has solid experience with healthcare clients, Beth was saying, sliding a folder across the table. Perfect for the Meridian expansion project. I nodded absently, my thoughts still circling around Michael's request. Sarah caught my eye from across the table, a subtle question in her expression. She was the only other person who fully understood the significance of Michael potentially joining our team. After the meeting, Sarah lingered until the room emptied. You still haven't decided about Michael, she observed. Not a question, but a statement. It's complicated, I admitted. Is it? She challenged. The man humiliated you, dismissed your ideas, and ran Treadway into the ground. Now he wants you to save his career. I sighed, closing my laptop. It's not that simple. We've all made mistakes. Some bigger than others, Sarah countered, crossing her arms. The team trusts you, Richard. We follow your lead because you've created a culture of respect here. How will bringing in the embodiment of everything we left behind affect that culture? Her concern was valid. The question wasn't just whether Michael deserved a second chance, but how his presence would impact the company we'd built. That evening I discussed it with Susan over dinner, laying out the pros and cons while she listened attentively. You know what's interesting, she said finally, refilling our wine glasses. 2 years ago you were the one needing a chance. Now you're in a position to offer one. The irony isn't lost on me, I acknowledged. Susan reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. What would the Richard who left Treadway want the Richard who runs Reed Digital to do? Her question stayed with me through a restless night. By morning, I had my answer. Michael arrived at our downtown office exactly 10 minutes early for his formal interview. He wore a suit that had once been expensive, but now showed subtle signs of wear. Beth escorted him to the small conference room where I waited with Sarah and Marcus, our operations director. The interview proceeded professionally, with Marcus and Sarah asking standard questions about experience and expertise. Michael answered capably, without the arrogance that had once defined him. When the formal questions concluded, I dismissed the others, asking Michael to stay. I've been thinking about our conversation, I began once we were alone. Michael nodded, his expression carefully neutral. I appreciate you considering me, Richard. Not everyone would. No, I agreed, they wouldn't. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. When I left Treadway, I promised myself I'd build a different kind of company, one where ideas were valued regardless of who proposed them, where respect was fundamental, not optional. You've succeeded, Michael said quietly. I turned back to face him. Yes, we have, and I won't risk that culture for anyone. His face fell slightly, anticipating rejection. I understand, but, I continued, I also believe in second chances. I wouldn't be here without one. Hope flickered in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm offering you a 3-month contract position, not as an executive but as a senior account strategist for our traditional media clients. I let that sink in. It was a good position, but several rungs below his former status as CEO. You'll report to Sarah, I added, if you can demonstrate that you've truly learned from your mistakes, that you can respect others and contribute to our culture. We'll discuss a permanent role when the contract ends. Michael exhaled slowly. That's more than fair. To be completely transparent, my team has reservations. You'll need to earn their trust, not just mine. He nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. I won't let you down. This isn't about me, I clarified. It's about proving you can be part of something built on mutual respect, not hierarchy. As we shook hands to seal the agreement, a sense of closure washed over me. The circle that began with humiliation in Treadway's boardroom was complete. The man who had once dismissed me was now grateful for the opportunity I offered. 6 weeks later, I observed Michael presenting strategic recommendations to a client in our main conference room. Gone was the condescending executive who talked down to everyone. In his place was a thoughtful professional who listened as much as he spoke, who credited others for their contributions, and who admitted when he didn't have all the answers. He's different, Sarah admitted grudgingly after the meeting. I didn't think people could change that much. Most don't get the chance to, I replied. Later that afternoon, I found Michael in the break room, making coffee for the team before their next client call, a small gesture that spoke volumes about his transformation. Got a minute? I asked. He followed me to my office, where I closed the door for privacy. The Westridge account, I began. They're impressed with your strategic approach. They want you to lead their rebranding project. Michael's expression brightened. That's a significant opportunity. Thank you for trusting me with it. You've earned it, I said simply. The team respects you, not because of your title or experience, but because of how you've conducted yourself these past weeks. He nodded, a hint of emotion in his eyes. This place is different from anywhere I've worked before. People collaborate instead of compete. They support each other. That's intentional, I said. When I left Treadway, I didn't just want to prove I could succeed on my own. I wanted to create an environment where no one would ever feel the way I felt that day in the boardroom. Michael was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that day a lot, he finally said. I was so convinced I knew better than everyone else. So afraid of being proven wrong that I couldn't recognize good ideas unless they were mine. And now, I prompted, now I understand that real leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating space for others to contribute their best work. I smiled, recognizing the journey he had taken, the same one I had experienced over the past 2 years. Your contract ends next month, I said. We'd like to offer you a permanent position as Director of Integrated Strategy. Relief and gratitude washed over his face. I'd be honored. As he left my office, I reflected on the unexpected path that had brought us both to this moment. 2 years ago, I had walked away from Treadway humiliated but determined. Today, I ran a thriving company built on the very principles Michael had once mocked. The greatest victory wasn't in proving him wrong or watching him humble himself to work for me. It was in creating something truly valuable from what had once been painful rejection. That evening, as I prepared to leave, I noticed the brass nameplate Susan had given me. Richard Reed, founder and CEO. Beside it now sat a simple framed quote I'd recently added. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. My phone buzzed with a text from Susan. Dinner's ready when you are. Proud of you today and always. I smiled, gathering my things. The bitter memory of that boardroom humiliation had finally lost its sting, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had not just survived, but thrived, and in the process had become the kind of leader I had always wished I had. You'll never make it out there, he had laughed during our meeting. I had quietly handed him my resignation. 2 years later, he asked if I was hiring, and I said yes.